Hello and welcome back to the Cosmic Enigma. Here we share real-life experiences of encounters with the unknown, stories that come from beyond the stars, crafted to help you relax and drift off to sleep. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from. I love seeing just how far this mystery reaches. Now find a comfortable spot, take a deep breath, and let yourself be carried away. Story 1. I sat unmoving, eyes on the shelf across the dim-lit room, struck by the absence I couldn't place. The air pulsed gently, as if breathing through unseen gaps, but all else remained starkly still. Objects leaned slightly, misaligned like a whisper of something mislaid. No clear sign emerged, yet discomfort lingered like a shadow overstaying its welcome. My gaze locked onto the vacant space, a haunting invitation wrapped in silence. Then a soft scrape of book slipped forward an inch, untouched. The silence swallowed my breath, and everything changed. The buzzing started 3 nights ago, or was it 3 weeks? Time moves differently now, pooling in corners like stagnant water. I wake to find my sheets damp with something that isn't sweat, something that smells of copper pennies and burnt air. The bedroom walls seem closer each morning, pressing inward with patient persistence. My fingers trace the windowsill where the paint has begun to peel in perfect spirals. I don't remember these marks being here before. The glass reflects my face, but the eyes looking back seem too bright, too aware of something I've forgotten. Outside, the streetlights flicker in patterns that almost make sense. There were lights behind the trees. The humming follows me through the house. It rises from the floorboards, vibrates through the pipes, settles in my teeth like a tuning fork struck against bone. I press my palms against my ears, but the sound comes from inside now, a frequency my body has learned to carry. In the kitchen, the refrigerator door stands ajar. The light inside pulses with irregular rhythm, casting shadows that move independently of their sources. Milk cartons lean toward each other like conspirators sharing secrets. The clock above the sink has stopped at an hour that doesn't exist on any face I recognize. I close the door, it opens again. The taste of metal fills my mouth when I try to remember, sharp, electric, like licking batteries as a child. But this flavor carries weight, substance, as if I've swallowed something that doesn't belong in human throats. My tongue explores the spaces between my teeth, searching for what isn't there. Sleep brings no rest. I float in spaces between dreams, suspended in amber darkness while voices speak in languages that bypass my ears entirely. They communicate through touch, through temperature, through the way air moves across skin. I understand everything and nothing. The noise didn't come from outside. Morning arrives without sunrise. The sky lightens gradually, filtered through what might be clouds but could be something else entirely. I stand at the bathroom mirror, watching my reflection lag behind my movements by fractions of seconds. The delay grows longer each day. My skin tingles in places where nothing has touched me. Phantom sensations crawl along my arms, my neck, the space between my shoulder blades. When I turn to look, the feeling shifts, always just beyond the edge of perception, like being watched by something that exists in peripheral vision. The shower runs cold, then scalding, then something between temperatures that shouldn't be possible. Steam rises in patterns that remind me of symbols I've never learned. The bathroom walls sweat condensation that tastes of ozone when it drips onto my lips. I don't remember ever coming back. The half-open door appears in every room now. Not the same door, but the same opening, the same slice of darkness beyond. Sometimes it's the closet, sometimes the basement entrance, sometimes a door that shouldn't exist in walls that were solid yesterday. The darkness breathes softly, exhaling air that carries scents of elsewhere. I approach, I retreat, I approach again. The space beyond refuses to reveal itself, yet something watches from within. Not eyes, but awareness. Not presence, but attention focused with surgical precision on the soft places where thoughts become vulnerable. My hand reaches for the handle, stops, reaches again. Time folds here. Minutes stretch into hours while seconds collapse into themselves. I lose track of which direction leads forward, which leads back to the moment before everything shifted. The door remains constant in its inconsistency, always slightly more open than I remember, never quite closed. The electrical sound grows stronger near the opening. Not the buzz of failing circuits, but something organic, alive, like the hum of blood through veins magnified 1,000 times. It syncs with my heartbeat until I can't tell where the sound ends and my pulse begins. There were lights behind the trees, but the trees moved closer overnight. Objects breathe now, the walls expand and contract with slow rhythm. Furniture shifts position when I'm not looking, not dramatically, just enough to make navigation treacherous. The house rearranges itself around me, creating new pathways, closing familiar ones. I find rooms I've never seen before, spaces that couldn't fit within the structure I thought I knew. A hallway extends beyond the boundaries of the building, lit by sources that cast no shadows. The floor feels solid beneath my feet, but my reflection in the window shows me suspended in empty air. The sensation of falling without movement, the knowledge of traveling without destination. My body remains stationary while something essential journeys to places that exist in the gaps between seconds. The tingling intensifies. It starts at my fingertips, spreads up my arms, pools in my chest like warm liquid. Not unpleasant, but wrong in ways I lack words to describe. As if my nervous system has been rewired to receive signals from transmitters that broadcast on impossible frequencies. I taste colors, I hear textures, I feel sounds as they pass through my bones, leaving resonances that linger for hours. The boundary between senses dissolves, creating new ways of experiencing reality that my brain struggles to process. The noise didn't come from outside, it came from the space where outside used to be. Memory surfaces in fragments, a field under starlight, grass that felt too soft beneath my feet, the smell of rain that never fell. I was walking, then I wasn't. I was alone, then I wasn't. The transition happened without transition, like stepping from one dream into another. Something approached, not walking, not flying, but moving through space in ways that bypassed the need for motion. It communicated without sound, touched without contact, examined without intrusion. Yet every cell in my body responded to its attention. The light was too white, too clean, too aware. It didn't illuminate so much as reveal, showing me aspects of myself I hadn't known existed. I became transparent, permeable, a collection of thoughts and sensations temporarily arranged in human form. Time stopped, or I stopped within time. The moments stretched like taffy, each second containing hours of experience compressed into instants my mind couldn't hold. I learned things that evaporated the moment I tried to grasp them, leaving only the aftertaste of knowledge too vast for human comprehension. I don't remember ever coming back, but I must have. The half-open door calls to me now with voices that aren't voices. The darkness beyond pulses with its own heartbeat, synchronized to rhythms that predate human awareness. I know if I step through, I'll find the field again, the light again, the presence that remade me from the inside out. My hand touches the handle. The metal feels warm, alive, responsive to my thoughts before I think them. The door swings wider, revealing not darkness but depth, not emptiness but possibility. The electrical sound rises to a crescendo that my ears can't hear but my bones can feel. I step forward, I step back, I step forward again. The space between steps expands into eternity. I exist in the threshold, neither inside nor out, neither present nor absent. The sensation of being observed intensifies until observation becomes transformation, attention becomes alteration. The lights behind the trees were never lights. The trees were never trees. The behind was never behind but through, beyond, within. I understand this now with a part of my mind that thinks in frequencies instead of words. My reflection in the window shows empty space. The mirror in the hallway reflects someone else entirely. The surface of still water reveals depths that extend upward into sky. I am becoming something that exists in the spaces between definitions. The buzzing stops. Silence fills the house like water, drowning sound before it can form. In this absence of noise, I hear everything. The whisper of dust settling, the sigh of paint drying, the conversation of shadows as they plan their next movements. I sat unmoving, eyes on the shelf across the dim-lit room, struck by the absence I couldn't place. The air pulsed gently, as if breathing through unseen gaps, but all else remained starkly still. Objects lined slightly, misaligned like a whisper of something mislaid. The book slips forward another inch. The door remains half open, waiting. The lights behind the trees begin to pulse in rhythm with my heartbeat, and I realize I never left the field at all. Story 2. I said I hadn't touched anything, just glanced around, waiting like they asked. The officer raised an eyebrow, noted it down, let it slide. Yet the room hummed with attention, the air thick and expectant. The lingering scent of lavender polish was undercut by something sharp and metallic. My hands, freshly cleaned, tingled as though brushed by trace evidence, leaving invisible fingerprints etched in my skin. Sunlight sliced through dusty glass, spotlighting the slight misalignment of a chair, a detail at odds with my claim. I hadn't moved, at least not in the way they thought, and all the while the echo of a creaking floorboard sat heavy in my ears. The dreams started 3 weeks before that room, before the questions, before the chair that shouldn't have been moved. At least I think they were dreams. The mind has a way of protecting itself, doesn't it? Of filing away what doesn't fit into neat categories labeled real and imagined. The first one was simple enough. I was lying in my bed, but the ceiling light was on. Not the warm yellow glow of my bedside lamp, but the harsh white fluorescent that belonged in the kitchen. In the dream, I stared at it, wondering why I'd left it on, why it seemed to pulse with each breath I took. There was a sound, too, distant and constant, like someone running water in another part of the house, but I live alone. I woke to darkness. The kitchen light was off. The house was silent except for the familiar hum of the refrigerator. Stress, I told myself. Work had been demanding, sleep irregular. Dreams of lights and sounds were probably my brain's way of processing the chaos. But the dream came back. The second time I was in the same position, staring at that same harsh light, only now it lasted longer. The light didn't just pulse, it moved, shifting in slow circles above me like it was attached to something I couldn't see. The sound of running water grew closer, more distinct. Not water at all, I realized, but something electronic. A hum with variations, like a voice being modulated through static. I tried to move in the dream, to turn my head toward the sound, but my body felt heavy, disconnected. My arms lay at my sides, tingling with that same sensation I'd later feel in the questioning room. The metallic scent was there too, sharp and clean, cutting through the familiar smell of my bedroom. The voice in the static grew clearer, though I couldn't make out words. It had a rhythm to it, patient and methodical, like someone reading from a script. I wanted to respond, to call out, but my throat felt sealed. The light continued its slow rotation, and I had the strangest sensation that it was looking at me, studying me. I woke gasping, my sheets soaked with sweat. The room was dark and quiet, but the metallic smell lingered. I checked the kitchen, the bathroom, anywhere water might have been running. Everything was dry and still. That morning I found the first trace. My coffee mug was in the sink, but I remembered leaving it on the counter. A small thing, easily explained. Maybe I'd put it there half asleep, forgotten in the fog of waking. But there was something else, a small mark on my forearm, circular and red like a pressure point. I had no memory of bumping into anything, no recollection of pain. The mark faded by afternoon, but the unease remained. Dreams don't leave physical evidence, I told myself. Dreams don't rearrange coffee mugs or mark skin. Yet the metallic scent seemed to follow me through the day, faint but persistent, mixing with the ordinary smells of soap and air freshener. The third dream changed everything. This time I wasn't in my bedroom. I was in a space I'd never seen before, though it felt familiar in the way childhood homes feel familiar even after years away. The walls were smooth and white, curving slightly as they met the ceiling. The light was everywhere now, not coming from above but emanating from the walls themselves, soft and even. I could move in this dream, though my movements felt sluggish, like walking underwater. The electronic humming was clearer now, surrounding me from all directions. It wasn't a voice at all, I realized, but multiple voices, overlapping and harmonizing in frequencies that made my teeth ache. There were others in the room with me, though I couldn't see them clearly. Shadows at the edge of my vision, moving with purpose I couldn't understand. They seemed to be working, their movements precise and unhurried. One of them approached, and I felt that same tingling sensation spread across my skin, starting at my forearm and radiating outward. I tried to speak, to ask what they wanted, but the words came out as whispers lost in the humming. The shadow leaned closer, and I caught a glimpse of something that might have been a face, smooth and featureless except for dark spaces where eyes should be. Time moved strangely in that place. I felt like I'd been there for hours, but also like I'd just arrived. The shadows continued their work, occasionally brushing against me with touches that felt both gentle and clinical. The tingling in my arm intensified, and I looked down to see a small device pressed against my skin, emitting a soft blue light. I woke to find my bedroom exactly as I'd left it, but the sensation of being watched persisted. The shadows from the dream seemed to linger at the corners of my vision, dissolving when I turned to look directly at them. The metallic smell was stronger now, so strong I opened windows to air out the room. But it wasn't coming from the room, it was coming from me. The contamination started small. I'd be washing dishes and hear the humming beneath the sound of running water. I'd catch glimpses of soft light in my peripheral vision, always disappearing when I turned to look. My reflection in mirrors seemed delayed, as if the image had to travel a great distance before reaching the glass. Electronics began acting strangely around me. My phone would lose signal in places where it had always worked fine. The television would develop static at random moments, the interference forming patterns that reminded me of the voices from my dreams. My laptop screen would flicker, displaying brief images I couldn't quite identify before returning to normal. I started losing track of time. I'd sit down to read and suddenly realize hours had passed without my awareness. I'd find myself standing in rooms with no memory of walking there, holding objects I didn't remember picking up. Once I discovered I'd been drawing on a piece of paper, sketching the same circular pattern over and over again. The pattern looked familiar, though I couldn't place where I'd seen it before. Sleep became unreliable. I'd lie down exhausted and find myself wide awake, staring at the ceiling and listening for sounds that never came. When I did sleep, the dreams were so vivid they felt more real than waking life. I'd spend entire nights in that white room with the shadow figures, feeling their gentle, clinical touches, hearing their modulated voices discussing things I couldn't understand. The marks on my arm began appearing regularly, always in the same spot, always fading by the next day. But they weren't the only changes. My reflection looked different somehow. Not older or younger, but altered in ways I couldn't define. My eyes seemed deeper, as if they'd seen things I couldn't remember. My skin had a faint luminescence in certain light, barely visible but definitely there. Friends started commenting on my behavior. I seemed distracted, they said, distant. I'd stop mid-conversation and stare at nothing, as if listening to something only I could hear. And maybe I was. The humming had become constant, a background frequency that colored every moment of my day. The revelation came gradually, like dawn breaking over a landscape I'd been walking through in darkness. I began to suspect that the dreams weren't dreams at all, but memories. Memories of something that had been done to me, then carefully erased or suppressed. The white room wasn't a product of my imagination, it was a place I'd actually been. The shadow figures weren't dream phantoms, they were real beings who had touched me, studied me, changed me in ways I was only beginning to understand. The evidence was everywhere once I knew how to look for it. The marks on my arm weren't random. They followed a pattern, appearing in sequence as if mapping something beneath my skin. The electronic interference wasn't coincidental. It was my body interacting with technology in ways it never had before. The lost time wasn't absent-mindedness. It was periods when I wasn't entirely present, when part of me was elsewhere. I started keeping a journal, documenting every strange occurrence, every moment of lost time, every glimpse of light or shadow that shouldn't have been there. The pattern that emerged was both terrifying and strangely comforting. I wasn't losing my mind. Something had happened to me, something real and significant, and my consciousness was slowly recovering the truth. But recovery came with a price. The more I remembered, the more the boundaries between dream and waking life dissolved. I'd find myself in the white room during what I thought were normal days, experiencing those clinical touches and modulated voices while part of me remained aware that I was supposed to be somewhere else, doing something else. The shadow figures became clearer as my memory improved. They weren't malevolent, I realized, but they weren't entirely benevolent either. They had a purpose that involved me, a project I was part of whether I'd consented or not. They worked with the patience of beings for whom time had little meaning, making small adjustments, monitoring changes, preparing for something I couldn't yet understand. Then came the room with the officer, the questions about what I'd touched and where I'd been, the chair that had moved despite my claim of stillness. The lingering scent of lavender mixed with that familiar metallic odor. The tingling in my hands that suggested I'd touched more than I remembered left traces of something that didn't belong in that ordinary room. I answered their questions as honestly as I could, but honesty had become a complicated concept. Had I touched anything? Not with my conscious mind, not with the version of myself that stood in that sunlit room answering questions. But there were other versions of me now, versions that existed in white rooms and moved through spaces that weren't quite part of the world everyone else inhabited. The officer let it slide, noted my responses, moved on to other matters. But I saw the way he looked at me, the same way my friends had started looking at me. As if I was there but not entirely there, present but somehow distant, familiar but fundamentally changed. That night I had the dream again. I was back in my bedroom, staring at the harsh white light that pulsed with each breath. The electronic humming filled the air, and I could feel the presence of the shadow figures even though I couldn't see them. Everything was exactly as it had been in the first dream, the same sensations, the same sounds, the same sense of being observed and studied. But this time, when I tried to move my hand, I succeeded. I lifted my arm and saw the device attached to my skin, the small blue light that had appeared in so many dreams. I touched it with my other hand, felt its smooth surface, its gentle warmth. And when I woke, it was still there. The device sat on my nightstand, no bigger than a coin, its blue light slowly fading in the morning sun. Real and impossible, dream made manifest, proof that the boundaries I'd believed in were nothing more than convenient illusions. I picked it up, felt its weight, its reality. The metallic scent grew stronger, and somewhere in the distance, I heard the sound of running water that wasn't water at all, but voices preparing to call me back to that white room where shadows worked with patient purpose and time moved like honey through spaces that existed between dream and waking. The device pulsed once in my palm, warm and alive, and I understood that this was just the beginning. The dreams weren't ending, they were becoming real, and I was becoming something else, something that could exist in both worlds, carrying messages between the shadow figures and the ordinary people who asked questions about moved chairs and touched objects. I set the device back on the nightstand and watched its light fade to nothing. But I knew it would return, just as the dreams would return, just as I would return to that white room where patient figures waited to continue their work. The morning sun sliced through my window, highlighting dust motes that danced like tiny lights, and I wondered if anyone else could see them moving in patterns that spelled out words in languages that hadn't been invented yet. Story 3. I told them I hadn't moved anything. The officers noted it, barely looking up, believing the innocuous story. Yet the imprint on the cushion suggested a presence, a weight that lingered moments longer than it should have. The air tinged with a faint trace of burnt wood, a scent that clung to my sleeves. A lone beam of sunlight sliced across the room, illuminating dust particles dancing in a maddening, silent rhythm. My hand bore a smudge, as though it had been dragged across something forgotten. The whisper of unsettled paper echoed my heartbeat. The walls seemed to line in, listening, but the scent stayed on my sleeves. That was how it all began to unravel, though I didn't understand it then. I'm recording this now from a place thousands of miles away, in a different climate, surrounded by different sounds. The ocean here crashes against rocks with a rhythm that should be soothing, but at night, when the waves pull back, I hear something else underneath, something that followed me. For 7 years, I haven't told anyone what really happened in that house, not the whole truth. I've practiced this confession in my head so many times that the words feel worn smooth, like stones tumbled by water. My therapist says talking helps, but she doesn't know what she's asking me to release into the world. Some stories, once spoken, take on a life of their own. I was house-sitting for a colleague who'd gone overseas for research. The arrangement seemed perfect, a quiet suburban home, well-stocked kitchen, reliable internet. I was between apartments and grateful for the solitude. The house sat on a corner lot, surrounded by mature oak trees that filtered the afternoon light into gentle patterns across hardwood floors. Everything felt ordinary, safe, forgettable. The first week passed without incident. I established routines: morning coffee by the bay window, afternoon work sessions in the study, evening walks around the neighborhood. The house had good bones, as they say. Solid construction, minimal creaking, efficient heating. I slept well in the guest bedroom, dreamless and deep. It was the radio that first made me pause. I'd been working in the kitchen, laptop open on the granite counter, when I noticed the old transistor radio on the windowsill had turned itself on. Not unusual for older electronics, I reasoned. Loose wiring, power fluctuations. But the station it had found wasn't broadcasting music or talk shows. Instead, a low hum filled the air, steady and monotonous, like the sound of distant machinery. I reached over and switched it off, but my fingers hesitated on the dial. The hum had been oddly comforting, almost hypnotic. When silence returned, the kitchen felt too quiet, as if something vital had been removed from the atmosphere. That night, I woke to the same hum drifting up from downstairs. I lay in bed listening, trying to convince myself it was the refrigerator or the heating system cycling on. But the sound had that same radio quality, slightly compressed, artificially transmitted. I pulled the covers higher and waited for sleep to reclaim me, but my body remained alert, every nerve ending attuned to the subtle vibration threading through the house. In the morning, the radio sat silent on its windowsill. Its antenna collapsed, its power cord unplugged and coiled neatly beside it. I began to notice other small disruptions. The bathroom mirror would fog over even when I hadn't showered. The overhead lights in the living room would flicker in sequence, one after another, like a slow-motion strobe. I'd catch glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision, quick darting shadows that vanished when I turned my head. Stress, I told myself, the upheaval of moving, the pressure of deadlines, the unfamiliarity of sleeping in someone else's space. I'd experienced similar symptoms before during particularly intense work periods. The mind creates patterns where none exist, seeks meaning in randomness. But then came the smell. Sweet and metallic like copper pennies dissolved in honey. It would appear suddenly in the hallway outside the bathroom, near the electrical outlets in the study, hovering around the thermostat in the living room. The scent never lingered long enough for me to identify its source, but it left behind a taste on my tongue, mineral and cloying. I started keeping windows cracked open, even as the weather grew colder. Fresh air helped, but only temporarily. The smell seemed to emanate from within the walls themselves, seeping through paint and plaster like a slow lake. My sleep became fractured. I'd wake at odd hours with the sensation that someone had just left the room, the air still disturbed by their passage. The floorboards outside the bedroom door would creak softly, as if settling back into place after bearing weight. I'd lie perfectly still, listening for footsteps, breathing, any confirmation of presence. Nothing, always nothing. During the day, I found myself drawn to the windows, scanning the street for unfamiliar cars, checking the locks on doors I'd already secured. The oak trees that had once provided comforting shade now seemed to press too close to the house, their branches scraping against siding and gutters with each gust of wind. I called my colleague overseas, ostensibly to check in, but really to fish for information about the house's history. Had he experienced anything unusual, any problems with the electrical system or plumbing? He laughed, said the place was solid as a rock, joked that I was getting cabin fever and should explore the town more. But I'd begun to feel safer inside, despite everything. The thought of leaving the house for extended periods filled me with an inexplicable anxiety. What if something happened while I was gone? What if I returned to find evidence of intrusion, disturbance, violation? The radio incident repeated itself several more times. I discover it playing that same low hum, always tuned to the same empty frequency. I removed the batteries, but it continued to activate. I unplugged it entirely and stored it in a closet, yet somehow it would reappear on the windowsill, cord neatly arranged, antenna extended towards some invisible transmission source. The hum began to follow me into other rooms. Not through the radio now, but seeming to emanate from the walls themselves. A deep, thrumming vibration that I felt more than heard, like standing too close to massive speakers playing subsonic frequencies. My chest would tighten when it started, my breathing becoming shallow and rapid. Electronic devices would flicker, the laptop screen, the microwave display, the digital clock beside the bed. I started experiencing what I can only describe as pressure episodes. Sudden, overwhelming sensations of weight pressing down on my chest, making it difficult to breathe or move. They'd last only seconds, but left me shaking and disoriented. During these episodes, the sweet metallic smell would intensify, flooding my nostrils until I gagged. The mirrors troubled me most. At first, I noticed only small discrepancies, my reflection seeming to lag behind my movements by a fraction of a second, or appearing slightly out of focus while everything else remained sharp. But as the days passed, the distortions became more pronounced. I'd catch glimpses of gestures I wasn't making, expressions that didn't match my mood. One morning, brushing my teeth in the bathroom mirror, I watched my reflection complete the motion and set down the toothbrush while I was still mid-brush. For a heartbeat, we stared at each other, me with foam still in my mouth, my reflection with lips already rinsed clean. Then the image snapped back into synchronization, leaving me wondering if I'd imagined the entire thing. I began avoiding mirrors when possible, but the house was full of them. Medicine cabinet, hallway, bedroom dresser, decorative pieces in the living room. They seemed to multiply, appearing in corners where I didn't remember seeing them before. Each surface reflected not just my image, but something else, a quality of light that didn't match the room's actual illumination, shadows that fell at impossible angles. The breakthrough moment came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was working in the study when the familiar hum began, but this time it was accompanied by something new, a rhythmic clicking, like Morse code or an old mechanical relay switching on and off. The sound drew me to the window, where I pressed my ear against the glass, trying to determine its origin. That's when I realized the clicking was synchronized with my heartbeat. Not approximately synchronized, perfectly matched, beat for beat, as if something was monitoring my pulse and translating it into audible signals. When I held my breath, the clicking paused. When my heart rate increased with growing panic, the tempo accelerated accordingly. I stumbled backward from the window, knocking over a chair, and the clicking stopped abruptly. But the hum continued, seeming to grow louder and more insistent. The laptop screen flickered violently, displaying fragmentary images, partial faces, distorted landscapes, geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. Then, in the sudden silence that followed, I heard my own voice coming from somewhere else in the house. Not an echo or recording, but my actual voice speaking words I wasn't saying. The sound drifted up from the kitchen, barely audible but unmistakably mine. I crept to the top of the stairs and listened as my voice discussed mundane topics, the weather, grocery lists, observations about the neighborhood, casual conversation with an unheard participant. I never went downstairs to investigate. Some instinct warned me that seeing the source would fundamentally change something I wasn't prepared to lose. Instead, I retreated to the bedroom and waited for the voices to stop. They continued for hours. That night I called a friend and asked if I could stay at her place for a few days. I invented a story about plumbing problems and needed repairs. She agreed without question, and I packed a bag with shaking hands, desperate to escape the house's increasingly oppressive atmosphere. But leaving proved more difficult than expected. Every time I approached the front door with my luggage, a wave of vertigo would strike, forcing me to sit down until it passed. The sweet metallic smell would intensify, seeming to coat my throat and lungs. My chest would tighten until breathing became laborious. It was as if the house itself was physically preventing my departure. I finally managed to leave by focusing on small, deliberate movements. One step, then another, hand on the doorknob, turn, pull, step outside. The moment I crossed the threshold, the symptoms vanished, leaving me gasping in the cool evening air like someone who'd been underwater too long. At my friend's apartment, I slept for 14 hours straight. When I woke, I felt clearer than I had in weeks. Colors seemed more vivid, sounds more distinct. I could breathe deeply without that constant pressure in my chest. My friend commented that I looked healthier, more like myself again. We spent the evening cooking dinner and watching movies, activities that felt almost surreal in their normalcy. But even as I enjoyed the respite, part of me remained connected to the house. I'd catch myself listening for that familiar hum beneath the ambient noise of city traffic. My reflection in my friend's bathroom mirror seemed somehow diminished, less substantial than it should be. And the smell, that sweet metallic scent, would occasionally drift past, so faint I couldn't be sure it was really there. After 3 days, I received a call from my colleague. He'd spoken with neighbors who reported seeing lights moving through the house at odd hours, and he was concerned about potential break-ins. Could I return to check on things? The police had done a cursory walk around, but found no signs of forced entry. I knew I had to go back. The house greeted me like an old friend. The moment I stepped inside, the familiar pressure settled over me, not unpleasant now, but almost welcoming. The air carried that distinctive sweetness, and I realized I'd missed it during my absence. The walls seemed closer, more intimate, as if the space had contracted slightly to better accommodate my presence. That first night back, I experienced the most vivid episode yet. I woke to find my bedroom filled with soft white light that seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere. The light cast no shadows, created no reflections, simply existed as a gentle, luminous presence. Within this glow, I could see shapes moving, not quite human, not quite abstract, but definitely purposeful in their motion. I wasn't afraid. The fear that had driven me from the house seemed distant now, replaced by a curious sense of belonging. The shapes moved closer, and I understood they'd been waiting for my return. Not malevolent, not exactly benevolent, but interested, invested in my presence in ways I couldn't comprehend. One shape approached the bed, and I felt a sensation like cool fingers tracing patterns on my forehead. The sweet metallic taste flooded my mouth, but instead of gagging, I found it almost pleasant. Information seemed to flow between us, not words or images, but direct transfer of understanding. I learned that I'd been selected, though for what purpose remained unclear. The house served as some kind of interface, a meeting point between different states of existence. My presence had activated dormant systems, opened channels that had remained closed for years. The mirrors, the radio, the electrical disturbances, all symptoms of increasing connectivity. When I woke the next morning, I retained only fragments of this encounter, but something fundamental had shifted. The house no longer felt like a temporary accommodation. It felt like home in the deepest sense, as if I'd finally found the place I was always meant to inhabit. The remaining weeks passed in a strange kind of harmony. The phenomena continued, mirrors showing impossible reflections, voices speaking from empty rooms, the constant underlying hum that seemed to synchronize with my biological rhythms. But instead of distressing me, these occurrences felt like evidence of a deeper connection forming. I stopped trying to rationalize or escape what was happening. Instead, I began to participate. I'd speak to the voices when they called, watch the mirror images without flinching, breathe in the sweet metallic air like a familiar perfume. My work suffered, but I felt more productive than ever, as if I was finally engaged in my true purpose. The end came suddenly. My colleague returned early from his research trip, arriving without warning while I was in the middle of what I can only describe as a conversation with the house itself. He found me sitting in the living room, speaking animatedly to empty air, responding to unheard questions with detailed answers about my thoughts, fears, and dreams. To him, I appeared to be having a breakdown. He called emergency services, and within hours I was removed from the house and placed under psychiatric observation. The official diagnosis was stress-induced psychosis brought on by isolation and overwork, medication, therapy, gradual reintegration into normal social functioning. I never told the doctors about the real nature of my experiences. How could I explain that I'd been chosen for something beyond their understanding, that the house had been preparing me for a transition I'd barely begun to comprehend? They wouldn't have believed me, and worse, they might have tried to sever the connection entirely. So I played the part of a recovered patient. I took the medications, attended the sessions, nodded at appropriate moments during discussions of stress management and healthy coping mechanisms. Eventually, I was released with a clean bill of mental health and recommendations for ongoing outpatient care. But the connection never broke. Even now, thousands of miles away, I feel the house's presence like a constant background hum in my consciousness. Sometimes, late at night, I catch glimpses of those impossible mirror reflections in shop windows or bathroom mirrors. The sweet metallic smell drifts past during moments of deep concentration. Electronic devices still flicker in my presence, though less dramatically than before. I've learned to live with this divided existence, outwardly normal, inwardly still tethered to something I can't fully explain or escape. Most days, the connection feels dormant, like a phone line left open but silent. But other days, especially when I'm alone for extended periods, I sense renewed activity on the other end. The house is still there, still waiting. I've looked it up online, seen real estate listings that describe it in terms I barely recognize: square footage, architectural details, neighborhood amenities. None of these descriptions capture what the house really is, what it's capable of becoming for the right occupant. Sometimes I wonder if I should return. The pull is strongest during thunderstorms, when the electromagnetic activity in the atmosphere seems to amplify whatever signal the house transmits. I'll find myself researching flights, calculating travel times, imagining the moment I cross that threshold again and feel the walls close around me like an embrace. But I know that going back would mean never leaving again. The house has been patient, allowing me this extended absence, but it won't make the same mistake twice. Next time, the connection would be permanent, complete, irreversible. So I stay here by the ocean, listening to waves that sometimes carry echoes of that familiar hum. I've built a life that looks normal from the outside: work, friends, routines that anchor me to this reality. But I know it's temporary. The house remembers me, and I remember it, and that mutual recognition creates a bond that distance can't break. The worst part is the certainty that I'm not alone in this experience. Sometimes, in crowded places, I'll catch someone's eye and recognize the same quality of divided attention, the same sense of being partially elsewhere. We never speak, what would be the point? But the recognition is mutual and immediate. There are others like me, scattered across distances, all connected to places that chose us for reasons we don't fully understand. We're marked now, permanently altered by encounters that most people would dismiss as impossible. The world contains more than it admits, and some of us have been selected to serve as bridges between what is and what waits just beyond perception. I'm telling you this now because the connection has been growing stronger lately. The hum is louder, the mirror reflections more frequent, the sweet metallic taste more persistent. I think my time here is running out. The house is calling me home, and I don't know how much longer I can resist. If you ever find yourself in a place that feels too attentive, too responsive to your presence, leave immediately. Don't try to understand or rationalize what's happening. Don't let curiosity override your instinct for self-preservation. Some connections, once formed, can never be broken. And if you're listening to this recording and wondering why I chose to share something so personal and disturbing, it's because I needed someone else to know. When I disappear, and I will disappear, probably sooner than I'd like, there should be some record of what really happened. Some explanation for why I left everything behind to return to a house that most people would consider perfectly ordinary. The truth is, I can feel it calling to me even now as I speak these words. The ocean outside my window is starting to hum in harmony with a frequency I recognize. My reflection in the computer screen is moving independently again, gesturing for me to come closer. The air tastes of copper and honey. I think it's time to go home. Story 4. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains, casting intricate patterns on the wooden floor. The scent of fresh paint lingered, mingling with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. On the counter, a single letter lay unopened, its envelope pristine except for an address that shimmered ever so slightly, like ink refusing to set. The hum of the refrigerator seemed louder than usual, filling the quiet with a steady drone. Outside, the usual chirping of birds was absent, replaced by a heavy stillness that pressed inward. As I reached for the letter, a chill ran down my spine, as if I was being watched by unseen eyes. That's where it starts. That's the only piece I trust anymore. There was a sound. I remember the sound more than anything else. A low-frequency hum that seemed to come from inside my own skull, vibrating through my teeth, making my jaw ache. It wasn't mechanical, not exactly. More like the sound you hear when you press your ear to a seashell, but deeper, more insistent. Sometimes I catch myself listening for it, tilting my head in empty rooms, waiting for that familiar throb to return. The coffee cup in my hand was trembling. I didn't realize I was shaking until I saw the ripples spreading across the dark surface, concentric circles that seemed to pulse in rhythm with that buried sound. Someone was there. I know someone was there, but I can't place when or where. The feeling sits heavy in my chest, that animal awareness of being observed, studied. My skin prickled with it. The air felt thick, charged, like the moments before a thunderstorm when every hair on your arm stands at attention. I turned around, scanning the empty kitchen, the vacant hallway beyond. Nothing. But the sensation persisted, crawling up my spine like cold fingers. Maybe I was still dreaming. The line between sleep and waking had become blurred, unreliable. Sometimes I'd find myself standing in rooms with no memory of walking there, as if I'd simply materialized, summoned by some unconscious pull. My thoughts weren't my own, that's how it felt anyway. Ideas would surface in my mind, fully formed, alien. I'd catch myself thinking in patterns that didn't match my usual mental rhythm. Words would echo in my head, spoken in my own voice but carrying meanings I didn't recognize. The sensation was like wearing someone else's clothes, familiar fabric cut for a different body. I'd pause mid-sentence, forgetting what I was about to say, as if someone had reached into my mind and plucked the words away. The kitchen seemed to tilt slightly, the floor becoming unreliable beneath my feet. I gripped the counter, knuckles white, waiting for the world to steady itself. The light changed. That's what I remember most clearly from that moment, or maybe it's what I've convinced myself I remember. The morning sun streaming through the curtains suddenly shifted, becoming harsh, clinical. The lace patterns on the floor transformed into something geometric, almost mathematical in their precision. The walls seemed to pulse with a faint luminescence, as if lit from within. I blinked hard, trying to clear my vision, but the strange illumination persisted. Objects in the room appeared hyper-defined, their edges too sharp, casting shadows that fell in impossible directions. The unopened letter on the counter seemed to glow, its surface reflecting light that wasn't there. Then silence, complete, absolute silence. Even the refrigerator's hum had stopped. Something stayed with me after that, a residue like the taste of copper on my tongue that wouldn't wash away no matter how much water I drank. My hands would tremble at unexpected moments, and I'd catch myself staring at them as if they belonged to someone else. The tremor was subtle but constant, a fine vibration that made writing difficult, made holding things feel uncertain. At night, I'd lie in bed and feel that same vibration in my chest, in my bones, as if something had rewired my nervous system. The taste of metal became my constant companion, metallic and sharp, coating the back of my throat. Sometimes I'd wake up with my tongue numb, as if I'd been pressing it against a battery. But wait, that's not how it happened. The light didn't change gradually. It was sudden, violent almost. One moment I was reaching for the letter, the next I was standing in what felt like the inside of a fluorescent bulb. The brightness was overwhelming, washing out all color, all detail. I couldn't see the kitchen anymore, couldn't see my own hands in front of my face, just white, endless burning white, and in that whiteness shapes moved, not quite shadows, not quite substance. They flowed like liquid mercury, forming patterns that my eyes couldn't quite follow. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was aggressive, pressing against my eardrums until I thought they might burst. When it ended, I was on the floor, the letter scattered in pieces around me, though I couldn't remember tearing it open. I don't try to understand anymore. Understanding requires a kind of linear thinking that I seem to have lost. The fragments don't fit together the way they should. Memory has become unreliable, a broken mirror reflecting distorted images. Sometimes I'll be doing something ordinary, washing dishes or folding laundry, and I'll feel that presence again, that sense of being watched, being studied. The tremor in my hands will intensify, and I'll taste copper so strongly it makes me gag. The world will seem to flicker just for a moment, like a television changing channels. I've learned not to look too closely at these moments, not to examine them too carefully. Some things are better left as fragments, as half-remembered dreams. The morning with the letter feels like it happened to someone else now, someone I used to be. Whatever changed that day, whatever shifted in the space between reaching and grasping, it's permanent. I carry it with me like a scar that never quite healed, tender to the touch, a reminder of something I can't quite name but can never quite forget. Story 5. The lid of the jar clicked softly as I sealed it. The lingering aroma of spices was still sharp, almost intrusive, as it crept into my breath. The room was dim, yet my skin registered a slight warmth, a barely perceptible change that prickled with foreboding. I noticed the air was heavier than before, as though it carried something it shouldn't. Beneath this familiar fragrance, an unsettling odor emerged, faint yet deliberate. The moment I inhaled, I knew something essential had shifted, leaving the room unchanged, yet irrevocably different. There's this sound that won't leave my head, a humming, low and mechanical, like something vibrating behind the walls. It comes in waves, sometimes so faint I think I'm imagining it, other times loud enough to make my teeth ache. The smell of copper pennies fills my mouth when it happens. My tongue goes dry. I remember standing in the hallway, pressing my ear against the plaster, feeling the vibration travel through my skull. The paint was cool against my cheek, but underneath, the wall felt warm, alive. The humming stopped the moment I pulled away, leaving only the taste of metal and the certainty that something was watching me retreat. I wasn't alone in the room. I know this the way you know you're being followed, that prickling awareness that crawls up your spine. But when I turned, nothing, just shadows that seemed too deep for the amount of light coming through the window. The air moved differently, like someone had just walked past, disturbing the stillness. I held my breath, listening for footsteps, for breathing that wasn't mine. The silence pressed against my eardrums until they rang. My heart hammered so hard I could feel it in my throat. Was I awake? The memory feels thin, like tissue paper, ready to tear if I examine it too closely. Sometimes I think I was dreaming, but dreams don't leave you with bruises on your arms where fingers might have gripped too tight. My thoughts felt scrambled, like radio static bleeding through a clear signal. Words that weren't mine echoed in my head, fragments of conversations I'd never had, numbers, coordinates maybe. The voice was my own, but speaking things I didn't understand. I found myself writing them down without meaning to, my hand moving across paper while my mind drifted somewhere else entirely. The handwriting looked wrong, too neat, too deliberate. When I tried to read what I'd written, the letters seemed to shift and blur. My vision went fuzzy at the edges. I blinked hard, shook my head, but the disorientation lingered like fog. It felt like wearing someone else's glasses, seeing the world through eyes that weren't quite calibrated to mine. The light came from everywhere and nowhere. Not sunlight, not electric light, but something else entirely. It pulsed with a rhythm that matched my heartbeat, or maybe my heart was matching it. The room strobed white, then normal, then white again. In those flashes, I saw things that shouldn't have been there, shapes that hurt to look at directly. Objects that seemed to exist only in the spaces between light and dark. The air tasted like burnt ozone, sharp and acidic. My skin tingled, every hair standing on end like before a lightning strike. The silence was absolute during those moments of brightness, as if the light had swallowed all sound. Then darkness would return, and with it that mechanical humming, louder than before. I squeezed my eyes shut, but the light came through my eyelids anyway, painting the inside of my skull red. I can't stop checking the corners of rooms now. My peripheral vision catches movement that isn't there when I turn to look. Mirrors reflect things a half second too late, like they're struggling to keep up with reality. The taste of copper never fully goes away. I find myself holding my breath without realizing it, listening for that humming sound. It's always there, just at the edge of hearing. My hands shake when I try to write, and sometimes I catch myself drawing symbols I don't recognize. Geometric patterns that make my eyes water if I stare too long. The jar sits on my kitchen counter, exactly where I left it, but sometimes the spices inside look different, darker, more alive. The smell that shouldn't be there grows stronger when I'm not paying attention, fading the moment I notice it. But maybe it didn't happen that way. Maybe there was no light, no humming. Maybe I was in the basement instead of the kitchen. The jar was already open when I found it, not sealed. The smell was coming from inside, not underneath. Something organic and wrong, like flowers left too long in stagnant water. The walls down there are concrete, not plaster, and when I pressed my ear against them I heard nothing, just the sound of my own blood rushing. The silence was worse than any humming could have been. It pressed against me like water, thick and suffocating. My reflection in the small window looked strange, distorted, like I was seeing myself through a funhouse mirror. The person staring back had my face but different eyes, older eyes, eyes that had seen something they shouldn't have. I don't try to understand it anymore. Understanding requires linear thinking, cause and effect, and this exists outside those rules. It lives in the spaces between thoughts, in the pause between heartbeats. Some nights I wake up with dirt under my fingernails, though I haven't been gardening. Sometimes I find footprints in my house that match my shoes but point in directions I never walked. The jar remains on the counter, a constant reminder of the moment everything changed. I've thought about throwing it away, but I know it would find its way back. Things like this always do. Instead, I've learned to live with the humming, the flashes of light that exist only in my memory, the certainty that I'm being watched by something that has no name. The world looks the same as it always did, but now I know that's just a comfortable lie we tell ourselves. Underneath the familiar surface, something else is breathing, waiting, existing in the spaces we pretend are empty. And sometimes, late at night when the humming grows loud enough to drown out my thoughts, I wonder if I'm still the same person who sealed that jar, or if I'm something else wearing my memories like an ill-fitting coat. Story 6. My fingertips brushed the surface of the wooden counter, feeling the grain under my skin. The scent of freshly ground coffee lingered, mingling with an inexplicable metallic tang in the air. The floor creaked beneath my weight as I shifted slightly, the sound more perceptible than usual. The room was quiet, too quiet, as if holding its breath. I noticed the chalk line on the floor by the doorway. It seemed to point somewhere it shouldn't, as if the world had shifted while I wasn't looking. Suddenly, the familiar corner of the room felt foreign. I've been standing here for what feels like hours, trying to remember why everything seems wrong. There's a gap in my memory, a hollow space where something important used to be. I know something happened to me, something that changed the way I perceive the world around me. The colors seem slightly off, like someone adjusted the saturation on reality itself. Sounds echo differently than they should. Even my own breathing feels foreign in my chest. The doctors said it was probably stress, maybe a mild concussion from a fall I couldn't remember. They ran their tests, asked their questions, and sent me home with reassurances that memory gaps were normal after trauma. But they couldn't explain why I wake up every morning feeling like I'm wearing someone else's skin. They couldn't explain the persistent sensation that something is watching me from just outside my peripheral vision. I've been trying to piece together what happened during those missing hours, or was it days? The timeline blurs at the edges, refusing to come into focus. I remember driving somewhere, but the destination eludes me. I remember the radio cutting to static, but not what I was listening to before. I remember pulling over, but not why. That's when I found the recording device in my jacket pocket. It's a small digital recorder, the kind you'd use for interviews or lectures. I don't remember owning it. The metal casing feels warm against my palm, warmer than it should be given the cool temperature of the room. When I hold it up to the light, I can see fingerprints on the surface, smudged and overlapping, as if it had been handled repeatedly by nervous fingers. The device contains a single audio file. The timestamp shows it was recorded during my missing time, but I have no memory of creating it. My finger hovers over the play button, trembling slightly. Part of me doesn't want to know what's on there. Part of me is terrified of what I might hear. I press play. Static fills the room, punctuated by what sounds like my own voice, distant and distorted as if speaking through water. The words are unclear, but the tone is urgent, almost panicked. I can hear myself saying something about lights, about how they move in ways that don't make sense. There's a sound in the background, a low humming that seems to shift frequency, rising and falling like electronic breathing. Then my voice becomes clearer. They're not supposed to be that bright. Nothing natural glows like that. I can feel them watching me through the windshield. The radio keeps switching stations by itself, but there's no music, just voices speaking in reverse. The recording cuts to silence for several seconds. When it resumes, I can hear what sounds like a car door opening, then footsteps on gravel. My breathing is audible, quick and shallow. There's that humming sound again, closer now, accompanied by what I can only describe as a high-pitched whine, like old television static given voice. I have to get closer, my recorded voice whispers. I have to see what they want. The file ends abruptly. I play it again and again, each time noticing details I missed before. There's something else in the background, beneath the static and the humming. It sounds almost like breathing, but not quite human, too regular, too deep. And there's a clicking sound, rhythmic and deliberate, like someone tapping Morse code on glass. As I listen to the recording for the fourth time, something shifts in my vision. The room around me seems to flicker just for a moment, like a fluorescent light struggling to stay on. The walls appear to breathe, expanding and contracting in slow, hypnotic waves. I blink hard, and everything returns to normal, but the sensation lingers. That's when the first fragment hits me. I'm standing beside my car on an empty stretch of road. The asphalt stretches endlessly in both directions, disappearing into darkness that seems too complete, too absolute. Above me, the sky is wrong. Instead of stars, there are points of light that pulse and move, forming patterns that hurt to look at directly. They're too bright, too close, casting shadows that fall upward instead of down. The air smells like new plastic and cold blood. I can feel something behind me just out of sight. Every time I turn to look, it moves, staying perpetually in my blind spot. My skin prickles with the awareness of being observed, studied, catalogued. The radio in my car continues to cycle through stations, but instead of music or talk shows, each frequency carries the same sound, that rhythmic clicking, growing faster and more insistent. The memory fades as quickly as it came, leaving me gasping in my kitchen. The recorder has stopped playing, though I don't remember turning it off. The display shows no files, as if the recording never existed. But I know what I heard, I know what I saw. I search through my belongings, looking for any other clues I might have left for myself. In the pocket of the jacket I was wearing, I find a small notebook filled with my handwriting. The entries are erratic, some written in pencil, others in ink, a few scratched into the paper with what looks like a fingernail. The first entry reads, "The lights followed me home. They're outside my window now, but when I look directly at them, they pretend to be stars." The second counted the trees in my backyard. Same number as yesterday, but they're arranged differently. The oak tree that used to be by the fence is now in the center. The soil around its roots is still fresh. The third entry is barely legible. Reflection in bathroom mirror blinked first. I didn't blink, it did. As I read these notes, written in my own hand but containing thoughts I don't remember thinking, the room begins to change around me. The shadows in the corners grow deeper, more substantial. They seem to move independently of their sources, creeping across the walls like living things. The humming sound from the recording starts up again, but now it's coming from inside the walls themselves. I walk to the window and peer outside. The street looks normal enough, lined with houses and parked cars, illuminated by the warm glow of streetlights. But something is off about the scene. The shadows cast by the streetlights are all wrong, falling at impossible angles. And in the distance, just at the edge of my vision, I can see lights that pulse and shift, too bright to be natural, too coordinated to be random. Another fragment surfaces, more vivid than the first. I'm walking through tall grass, my feet sinking slightly into soft earth with each step. The air is thick and humid, carrying that same smell of new plastic and cold blood. Ahead of me, a structure rises from the ground, but my eyes refuse to focus on it properly. It's simultaneously massive and small, near and far, solid and translucent. Looking at it directly causes a sharp pain behind my eyes, so I approach it sideways, keeping it in my peripheral vision. There are others here with me, but I can't see them clearly. They move like shadows, always just outside my direct line of sight. I can hear them whispering, their voices overlapping and echoing until the words become meaningless. The clicking sound is everywhere now, coming from the structure, from the ground beneath my feet, from the air itself. As I get closer to the impossible building, I realize that the clicking isn't random. It's a pattern, a sequence that repeats with subtle variations. It's trying to communicate something, but the meaning hovers just beyond my comprehension, like a word on the tip of my tongue that refuses to be spoken. I reach out to touch the surface of the structure, and my hand passes through it as if it were made of smoke. But I can feel it, solid and warm and alive, pulsing with a rhythm that matches my own heartbeat. The sensation travels up my arm, spreading through my body like an infection of awareness. I understand in that moment that I'm not supposed to be here, that this place exists in the spaces between thoughts, in the gaps where memory fails. The fragment dissolves, leaving me back in my kitchen, but the sensation of that alien touch lingers on my skin. I look down at my hand and notice something I hadn't seen before. There's a mark on my palm, faint but unmistakable. It looks like a burn, but the pattern is too precise, too deliberate. It resembles the clicking rhythm I keep hearing, translated into physical form. I return to the notebook, flipping through pages filled with increasingly erratic observations. One entry catches my attention. They don't want me to remember, but they can't stop the dreams. In sleep, the barriers are thinner. The truth glides through. That's when I realize I haven't been sleeping well, haven't been sleeping at all, really. When I close my eyes, I see those pulsing lights, feel that presence hovering just outside perception. My dreams are filled with impossible geometries and sounds that have no earthly source. I wake up exhausted, with the taste of metal in my mouth and the sensation that someone has been whispering in my ear all night. I decide to stay awake to see what happens when I stop fighting the strangeness that has invaded my life. I sit in my living room, surrounded by the familiar objects of my normal existence, and wait. The house settles around me with its usual creaks and sighs, but underneath those ordinary sounds I can hear something else. That rhythmic clicking, so faint it might be my imagination, but growing steadily stronger. The walls begin to breathe again, expanding and contracting in slow, hypnotic waves. The air grows thick and heavy, carrying that distinctive smell that makes my stomach turn. And then, in the reflection of the darkened television screen, I see something that shouldn't be there. It's me, but not me. The reflection moves independently, turning its head to look directly at me with eyes that hold no recognition, no humanity. Its mouth opens and closes in sync with the clicking sound, as if it's the source of that alien communication. When I raise my hand, the reflection doesn't mirror the movement. Instead, it presses its palm against the glass from the other side, and I can see the same burn mark that decorates my own skin. The final fragment crashes over me like a wave, bringing with it a clarity so intense it's almost painful. I'm back in that impossible place, but now I can see it clearly. The structure isn't a building at all. It's alive, a massive organism that defies every law of physics and biology I understand. Its surface ripples with patterns of light that spell out messages in a language I've never learned but somehow comprehend. It's telling me about the spaces between spaces, the places where reality grows thin and other things can slip through. The shadowy figures around me resolve into clarity, and I see that they're not people at all. They're echoes, impressions left behind by others who stumbled into this place and couldn't find their way back. Their whispers aren't words but warnings, desperate attempts to communicate the danger I'm in. The clicking sound reaches a crescendo, and suddenly I understand what it's saying. It's counting down, marking the moments until something fundamental changes. The barrier between this place and my world is dissolving, has been dissolving since the moment I first set foot here. Every memory they've taken from me, every fragment they've hidden, was an attempt to slow the process, but it's too late now. I can feel myself being pulled in two directions at once. Part of me remains in that alien landscape, forever trapped in the spaces between thoughts, but another part has been sent back, carrying with it a seed of otherness that grows stronger with each passing moment. I'm becoming a bridge, a conduit through which that impossible realm can bleed into reality. The fragment ends, but this time the transition back to my kitchen isn't clean. Elements of that other place cling to the edges of my perception. The walls still breathe, the shadows still move independently, and the clicking sound has become a permanent fixture in the background of my awareness. I look at my reflection in the window, and for just a moment I see something else looking back, something that wears my face but serves a different purpose. It smiles, and I realize with growing horror that I'm not trying to remember what happened to me. I'm trying to forget what I'm becoming. The notebook falls from my hands, its pages fluttering open to reveal a final entry I don't remember writing. The reconstruction is complete. The door is open. They're coming through. Outside, the streetlights begin to pulse in that familiar rhythm, and I know that my investigation has served its purpose. I was never meant to remember everything. I was only meant to remember enough to finish what was started in that place between places. The clicking sound grows louder, more insistent, and I realize it's not coming from the walls anymore. It's coming from inside my head, from the part of me that no longer belongs entirely to this world. The part that's been growing stronger with each recovered fragment, each piece of forbidden knowledge I've uncovered. I walk to the window and look out at the street, now bathed in that impossible light. The other houses remain dark and silent, their occupants unaware of what's happening just outside their doors. But they'll learn soon enough. We all will. The question isn't what happened to me during those missing hours. The question is what I brought back with me, and whether the person standing here in my kitchen is still entirely human. The clicking sound reaches a final, triumphant crescendo, and in the silence that follows, I hear something that chills me to the bone. I hear myself laughing, but the sound is coming from outside. Story 7. Window blinds swayed ever so slightly, a dance to a rhythm I couldn't hear. Stillness enveloped me as I stood transfixed, watching the narrow beam of streetlight stretch across the floor. The radiator clicked sporadically, a reminder of the unseen ebb and flow in the room's stagnant air. In the corner, an old clock ticked slowly, each second heavier than the last, offering no answers to the questions I didn't dare form. I didn't know what was different, only that the familiarity felt jagged, mismatched. But then the door frame, normally aligned perfectly with its shadow, just wasn't. There's this sound, I remember it now, cutting through everything else like a blade through silk. A low-frequency hum that seemed to vibrate inside my teeth, making my jaw ache in ways I'd never felt before. It wasn't coming from anywhere I could point to, not the walls, not the floor, not the ceiling. It was just there, existing in the space between spaces. Sometimes I think it was electrical, like when the power lines sing in the rain. Other times it felt organic, like breathing. Like something massive taking slow, deliberate breaths just outside my perception. The smell came with it too, sharp, metallic, like licking a battery or standing too close to lightning. It made the back of my throat burn. I wasn't alone, that much I know, even when logic tells me I had to be. The house was empty, doors locked, windows sealed tight against the night. But there was weight in the air, the kind of presence that makes your skin crawl before you even turn around. I could feel eyes on me, but not human eyes. Something that watched differently, processed what it saw through filters I couldn't understand. When I turned my head, the sensation moved with me, always staying just at the edge of my peripheral vision. My breathing got shallow, my hands started trembling. The air itself felt thicker, like trying to move through honey. I kept checking the locks over and over, but they were always secure, always locked from the inside. My thoughts weren't my own, that's the only way I can describe it. Ideas would surface in my mind that felt foreign, like someone else's voice whispering suggestions I didn't want to hear. I'd find myself walking to windows I had no intention of approaching, my hand reaching for light switches without my conscious decision. The worst part was how natural it felt in the moment, like sleepwalking while awake. I'd snap back to awareness standing in rooms I didn't remember entering, holding objects I couldn't recall picking up. My reflection in mirrors looked delayed, like it was taking an extra half-second to catch up with my movements. Time felt elastic, stretching and compressing without warning. Minutes felt like hours, then hours would vanish in what seemed like seconds. Lights went out all at once. Not a gradual dimming, not the flicker of a power outage. Just instant, complete darkness that felt heavier than normal darkness should. Then came the flashes. Strobing bursts of illumination that showed my room in snapshots, each frame slightly different from the last. In one flash, the furniture was exactly where it should be. In the next, everything had shifted 3 inches to the left. The walls seemed to pulse with each burst of light, breathing in and out like living tissue. I could hear something moving, but the sounds were wrong. Footsteps that were too light, too quick, like someone walking on the tips of their fingers. Objects being moved with impossible gentleness, no scraping or bumping, just the soft whisper of displacement. My throat closed up. I couldn't scream even though every instinct told me to. Even now, weeks later, I can feel it in my bones. This constant low-level vibration, like my skeleton is a tuning fork that got struck and never stopped resonating. My sleep is different, not better or worse, just fundamentally altered. I dream in frequencies now, colors that don't have names, textures my skin has never actually touched. Food tastes muted, like I'm experiencing flavor through a filter. Mirrors still bother me. Not because of what I see, but because of what I feel when I look. Like I'm being examined, cataloged, filed away in some vast system I'll never comprehend. The air conditioning in every building sounds like that original hum now. Every electrical device carries an echo of that metallic taste. I've started avoiding certain rooms without knowing why, my body steering me away from spaces that feel too familiar. But wait, that's not how it happened. The lights didn't go out at all. They got brighter, impossibly bright, like staring directly into the sun, but I couldn't close my eyes or look away. The brightness had weight pressing down on me from above, making my knees buckle. Everything in the room became translucent, like X-ray images of themselves. I could see through the walls, through the floor, through my own hands when I held them up. The boundaries between objects dissolved. I was looking at the framework underneath reality, the skeleton that holds everything together. There were no footsteps because nothing was walking. The movement I heard was the sound of space itself shifting, reality adjusting its grip. The metallic taste wasn't in the air. It was in my blood, seeping through my pores, changing my chemistry from the inside out. My teeth felt loose in my gums. My fingernails ached. I don't try to understand anymore. Understanding feels dangerous now, like picking at a scab that's covering something that shouldn't heal. Some nights I catch myself standing by that same window, watching the blinds sway to rhythms I still can't hear. The doorframe is straight now, perfectly aligned with its shadow, but that feels wrong too, like a lie told to keep me calm. I've learned not to trust the familiar, not to assume that unchanged means safe. There are gaps in my days now, small pockets of time I can't account for. I'll be reading a book and suddenly it's 3 hours later and I'm in the kitchen holding a glass of water I don't remember pouring. The water always tastes like metal, always carries that electric tang that makes my throat burn. I don't drink it, but I don't put it down either. I just stand there holding it, waiting for something I can't name to tell me what comes next. The waiting is the hardest part. The knowing that whatever happened isn't finished with me yet. Story 8. It smelled like aged lilacs, the kind that linger in the folds of forgotten fabric. The aroma swept over me as I stood in the hallway where the air rarely stirred. My pulse quickened, a familiar sensation of a memory teetering on the edge of recognition. The scent felt misplaced, mingling with the mundane smell of dust and floor polish. I traced it to the living room, where light filtered dimly through heavy curtains, casting speckled patterns on the worn carpet. The scent grew sharper, intertwining with the echo of laughter that didn't belong to the present. It was as if the room itself was holding its breath, waiting for a truth I had long avoided. I realized I needed to open the old chest in the corner, untouched for years. I hadn't smelt that perfume since the day it disappeared. The sleep doesn't come anymore, not real sleep. When I close my eyes, there's this persistent humming that seems to rise from somewhere deep beneath the floorboards. It's not the refrigerator, not the heating system. I've checked everything twice, 3 times. The sound follows a pattern I can't quite place, like a frequency that my body recognizes but my mind rejects. The television turns itself on at irregular intervals. Always the same static-filled channel, always that soft white noise that makes my teeth ache. I've unplugged it, removed the batteries from the remote, but somehow it still flickers to life in the peripheral darkness. The screen casts this pale glow across the room, and in that light, shadows seem to move with purpose. My neighbors have stopped asking about the complaints. They say there are no lights coming from my windows during the night hours, no strange sounds echoing through the walls. But I see them watching from behind their curtains when I walk to my car. Their expressions carry something I recognize now as pity mixed with unease. They think I'm losing my grip on reality. The metallic taste in my mouth has become constant. It's like holding copper pennies under my tongue, that sharp, electric flavor that makes my saliva feel thick and wrong. I've seen doctors, had blood tests, dental examinations. Everything comes back normal, they say. But normal doesn't explain why the taste intensifies whenever I approach the back windows of my house, the ones that face the empty field beyond the fence. There are marks on my skin that I don't remember getting. Small, perfectly circular impressions along my forearms, faded now but still visible in the right light. They don't hurt, but they feel warm to the touch, as if something beneath the surface is still active. When I press my fingers against them, the humming in the walls seems to respond, growing slightly louder, more insistent. I keep finding myself standing in rooms with no memory of entering them. The kitchen mostly, facing the window that overlooks the field. My feet are often cold, as if I've been standing on the linoleum for longer than I realize. The clock on the microwave blinks inconsistently, never showing the right time, never keeping proper pace with the rest of the world. The dreams, when they do come, are fragments. I see myself from above as if I'm watching someone else entirely. There's this figure standing motionless in the field, barely visible against the darkness. In the dream, I'm not afraid. I'm walking toward it with purpose, with recognition. But when I wake, my heart pounds with a terror that feels borrowed from someone else's experience. People's voices sound different now, like they're speaking through water or from a great distance. Even when they're standing right next to me, their words seem to arrive seconds after their lips move. I find myself nodding at conversations I can't quite follow, smiling at jokes I don't hear properly. The disconnect is growing wider each day. The air in my house feels thicker than it should. Sometimes I catch myself taking deeper breaths as if the oxygen content has changed. There's a pressure here that wasn't present before, like being underwater but still able to breathe. My ears pop frequently, especially when I move between rooms, as if the atmospheric pressure shifts with my location. I remember now the moment when everything changed, though the memory feels like it belongs to someone else. I was standing at my bedroom window, looking out at the field where the grass grows in perfect circles. There was something there, suspended above the ground, completely silent. Not a machine, not a vehicle, but something that existed in a way that defied the logic I'd always trusted. It wasn't moving, but it wasn't still either. The air around it seemed to bend, creating ripples like heat waves, but cold, so cold that the window glass fogged despite the warm evening. I stood there watching for what felt like hours, though the clock later insisted only minutes had passed. The thing, whatever it was, seemed to be watching me back. My body felt disconnected during those moments, as if I was observing myself from somewhere else entirely. I could see my own figure silhouetted in the window, but I could also see myself from outside, from above, from angles that should have been impossible. The perspective kept shifting, like looking through multiple cameras at once. There was no sound when it happened, but I felt the vibration in my bones, a frequency so low it bypassed my ears entirely and resonated directly through my skeleton. The walls of the house seemed to pulse in rhythm with it, and I could taste metal flooding my mouth like blood. The air grew thick with the scent of ozone and something else, something organic and unfamiliar. Going back further, I can trace the signs I should have recognized. The electrical disturbances had been building for weeks. Light bulbs burning out in sequence, always in the same pattern, starting from the back of the house and moving forward. The radio picking up transmissions in languages I didn't recognize, voices speaking in measured, emotionless tones that made my skin crawl. The temperature changes were subtle at first. Certain spots in the house would grow cold without explanation, small pockets of air that felt like walking through invisible streams of winter. I'd find myself avoiding those areas instinctively, taking longer paths through my own home without really understanding why. My reflection in mirrors began to look wrong, though I couldn't pinpoint exactly how. The face was mine, the features unchanged, but something in the eyes seemed distant, as if I was looking at someone who was looking at someone else. I started avoiding mirrors, then covering them, then removing them entirely from the walls. The sound started even earlier than I initially remembered. Soft tapping against the walls, always in groups of 3, always moving in a pattern from one room to the next. I assumed it was settling, the house adjusting to temperature changes or shifting foundations. But the taps followed a rhythm too deliberate to be random, too purposeful to be natural. There were gaps in my routine that I didn't notice at first. I'd find dinner dishes in the sink with no memory of cooking, books open to pages I didn't remember reading, doors unlocked that I was certain I'd secured. Time seemed to slip away in small increments, minutes here and there that added up to hours I couldn't account for. The field behind my house began to change in ways so gradual I almost missed them entirely. The grass grew in patterns that seemed too organized for nature, perfect spirals and geometric shapes that became more pronounced as the weeks passed. Animals stopped crossing through the area, leaving a wide perimeter of undisturbed earth around the formations. At night there were lights that didn't belong to any source I could identify. Not bright, but persistent, hovering just above the grass line like fireflies that never moved. They'd appear in clusters, then fade one by one until only darkness remained. I convinced myself they were reflections, distant cars, anything that fit within the boundaries of normal explanation. I can remember now the very beginning, the moment when everything was still ordinary. I'd been standing in my kitchen, making coffee, watching the sunrise paint the field in shades of gold and amber. The grass swayed gently in the morning breeze, and birds called to each other from the trees that lined the property. Everything felt peaceful, settled, exactly as it should be. The air smelled of dew and earth, clean and familiar. My house felt like home, the walls solid and reassuring, the rooms filled with comfortable silence. I had no reason to fear the approaching evening, no cause to dread the darkness that would fall across the field beyond my windows. But even then, in that perfect moment of normalcy, something was already watching from the spaces between certainty and doubt. Something that understood I was ready, though I had no idea what I was ready for. The morning light felt different that day, as if it was illuminating not just the present, but casting shadows of a future I couldn't yet imagine. And now, as I sit here trying to make sense of the fragments, I realize that whatever happened in that field, whatever stood there in the darkness watching me watch it, isn't finished with me yet. The humming in the walls grows stronger each night, and I can feel something vast and patient settling into the spaces around my life, waiting for the right moment to complete what it started. Story 9. A faint scent of ink, sharp and aged, filled the air. It lingered, seemingly born from the dust-lined corners of the room. I walked in slowly, my feet hesitating on each step of the creaky floorboard drawn by the memory of an old ledger. The tang of it, so out of place in my kitchen, pulled at a part of my mind I had long since cordoned off. As if in a trance, my hand reached for the brittle edge of the table, tracing an invisible line where ink should never be. The walls seemed to lean in, the ceiling pressing slightly lower. This ink, it spoke of letters blotched and secrets once whispered on yellowed paper. I hadn't smelled ink like that since the day the pages closed for the last time. To whoever finds this, if anyone ever does, I'm writing because I can't carry this anymore. The weight of it sits behind my ribs like a stone, pressing against everything soft inside me until I can barely breathe. You won't believe what I'm about to tell you. Hell, I'm not sure I believe it myself. But it happened, or maybe it didn't. Maybe that's the point. I've been keeping this secret for so long that it started to feel like a second skin, something I wear but never acknowledge. People look at me differently now. They don't know why, but they do. Their eyes slide past mine in conversations. Cashiers forget to give me my change. Children stare from across the street with that peculiar intensity they reserve for things that don't quite fit. You need to understand I was normal once. I had routines. I knew the sound of my own footsteps on these floors, recognized my reflection without that split second of confusion, slept through nights without waking to check if the shadows had moved. But there's this humming now, always humming. It started the morning after I found that room. Not a room I'd ever seen before, though it sat in my house like it had always belonged there. Between the bathroom and the bedroom, where before there had only been wall. The door was slightly ajar, and through the gap came that smell ink, old and patient, waiting. The humming comes from there, even when the door is closed, even when I can't see the door at all. I remember walking inside that first time, my bare feet cold against floorboards that felt different from the rest of the house. Older, more worn. The walls were lined with shelves, and the shelves were filled with ledgers. Hundreds of them, their spines cracked and faded, some so old the titles had worn away completely. I pulled one down. The pages were thick, cream-colored, covered in handwriting that looked almost familiar. Almost like mine, but not quite, the letters lined differently. The pressure of the pen was heavier in some places, lighter in others, as if the hand that wrote them was learning my movements but hadn't perfected them yet. The entries were mundane: grocery lists, appointments, reminders to call people whose names I didn't recognize but somehow knew I should. But as I flipped through the pages, the handwriting began to change, slowly, subtly, until by the end of the ledger it was unmistakably mine. I dropped the book. The sound it made hitting the floor was wrong, too soft, too muffled, like the room swallowed it before it could fully form. That's when I noticed the mirror. It hung on the far wall, old and silvered, its surface clouded with age, but the reflection it showed wasn't quite right. The room looked the same, the shelves in their proper places, but I was different, slightly out of focus, like I was standing just a little bit behind where I actually was. I raised my hand. The reflection raised its hand a heartbeat later. I backed out of the room and closed the door. When I looked for it again an hour later, there was only wall. But the humming remained. It follows me now, in the grocery store, threading between the aisles like a whispered conversation I can't quite make out. At work, vibrating through the fluorescent lights until my teeth ache. In bed, rising from somewhere beneath the floorboards, a lullaby that keeps me awake. Sometimes I catch glimpses of that room in my peripheral vision, the door standing open, the shelves waiting. I'll turn my head and it's gone, but the smell lingers, ink and dust and something else. Something that reminds me of my own skin after a fever breaks. The mirror appears in other places now. Bathroom medicine cabinets, store windows, the black screen of my phone when it's turned off, always showing me that same slightly displaced version of myself. Always that fraction of a second delay, as if my reflection is learning to keep up but hasn't quite mastered the timing. People have stopped calling, not all at once that would have been noticeable, but gradually like a tide pulling back. Invitations that don't come, messages that go unanswered. I tell myself it's coincidence, but I've started to wonder if I'm becoming something they can sense but not name. Something that makes them uncomfortable in ways they can't articulate. I found another ledger yesterday, not in that impossible room, but here on my kitchen table, open to a page covered in my handwriting. Words I don't remember writing, in ink that smelled of dust and secrets. The spaces between things are larger than they appear. Sometimes we slip through without meaning to. Sometimes we get caught halfway. My hand was stained with ink when I woke up this morning. The same sharp, aged smell that started all of this. I've been thinking about that reflection, the way it hesitated before following my movements. What if it wasn't learning to copy me? What if it was trying to replace me? What if every time I looked into that mirror, a little bit more of me stayed behind in that room, and a little bit more of whatever was in there came back with me? The humming is louder now. It's in my voice when I speak, threading through my words like a harmony I never asked for. I can feel it in my chest, vibrating against my ribs, making my heartbeat sound unfamiliar. I don't know how much of me is left. Maybe that's why I'm writing this. Maybe it's a way of marking what was here before, of leaving some proof that I existed as I was, not as whatever I'm becoming. Or maybe it's already too late. Maybe the thing writing these words isn't me at all, but something that learned to hold a pen the way I did, something that absorbed my memories along with my handwriting. The room is back. I can see the door from where I sit, standing open like an invitation or a mouth. The ledgers are calling to me, their pages rustling though there's no wind. I know if I go in there again, if I pull another book from those shelves, I'll find more of my handwriting, more words I never meant to write. But I also know I'm going to go, because the humming is so loud now, and the only place it seems to quiet is in that room, surrounded by all those records of a life I'm not sure I actually lived. If you find this letter, if you're reading these words, then maybe some part of me made it through. Maybe there's still something here worth finding. Or maybe you're just reading the confession of something that learned to pretend it was human, something that borrowed a life and wore it like clothes that almost fit. The ink smell is everywhere now. It's in my hair, on my skin, seeping from my pores like I'm becoming the very thing that called to me from those dusty corners. My reflection doesn't hesitate anymore. If anything, it moves first and I follow. I can hear pages turning in the other room, slow, deliberate, like someone reading through a story they already know by heart. The sound of my own breathing seems to come from somewhere else, echoing back to me as if I'm hearing it through water. The humming has words now. I can almost make them out, almost understand what they're trying to tell me. They sound like my voice, but older, more patient, like they've been waiting a very long time for me to listen. I think I understand now. The room was never separate from the house. It was always here, waiting behind that wall, behind the space where logic says nothing should fit. And I was always meant to find it, to breathe in that ink-scented air and let it change me from the inside out. The person who lived here before, who walked on these floors and slept in this bed and looked in these mirrors, maybe they left the same way. Maybe they wrote their own letter, tried to explain what was happening to them as they felt themselves dissolving into something else. Maybe their words are in one of those ledgers, written in handwriting that started as theirs and ended as mine. I can see my reflection in the window now, and it's smiling though I'm not. It raises its hand in a small wave like it's saying goodbye or hello. The pages are still turning. The humming has become a song, and the smell of ink is so strong now that I can taste it, sharp and metallic on my tongue, like blood mixed with memories. I should stop writing. I should put down this pen and walk away from these words, but my hand keeps moving, forming letters I don't remember deciding to make, telling a story that feels both mine and not mine at all. If someone else finds this house, if they smell that particular scent of aged ink rising from corners where it shouldn't be, don't follow it. Don't let curiosity pull you toward doors that weren't there before. Don't look too long into mirrors that show you standing just slightly out of place. But I know you will, because the humming is already starting for you, isn't it? You can feel it just at the edge of hearing, threading through these words like a melody you almost recognize. The room is waiting, the ledgers are ready, and somewhere in those pages there's space for your handwriting too. The ink remembers everything, even the things that never quite happened. Even the people who were never quite there. Story 10. It used to arrive every Tuesday, slipped quietly under the door, a plain envelope addressed in neat handwriting. At first I thought nothing of it, just another routine delivery in the monotony of weeks. The contents varied, but the envelope remained consistent, a reassuring constant in a bustling world. Last week I noticed a smear of ink on the corner, subtle yet stark against the otherwise pristine paper. This Tuesday the envelope was uncharacteristically thin, and the handwriting seemed slightly hurried, less precise. This time the paper bore no message at all, just a blank sheet, smooth but strangely heavy in my hand. The weight of it surprised me. Paper shouldn't feel dense like that, shouldn't pull at your fingers as if gravity had suddenly remembered how to be hungry. I held it up to the window, searching for watermarks or hidden text, but saw only the pale morning light filtering through something that should have been ordinary. The humming started that afternoon. Not the refrigerator, not the air conditioning. Something deeper, threading through the walls like a current I could feel in my teeth. I pressed my ear to different surfaces, following the vibration from room to room, but it seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere, a frequency that lived just beneath conscious hearing. I don't remember falling asleep that night. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed, still holding the blank paper, watching shadows shift across the ceiling in patterns that didn't match the streetlight outside. The humming had grown softer, almost melodic, and my eyelids felt heavy with a weight that wasn't quite tiredness. There were lights behind the trees. When I woke, the paper was gone. My hands were empty, fingers slightly numb as if I'd been gripping something for hours. The digital clock read numbers that seemed wrong, though I couldn't say why. The air tasted metallic, sharp against the back of my throat, like breathing through copper pennies. The humming was still there, fainter now, but constant. I searched every room for the paper, moving with an urgency I didn't understand. Under furniture, between cushions, in drawers I never opened. My skin prickled with each step, tiny electric shocks that had no source. The house felt different, as if the walls had shifted slightly inward while I slept, changing the acoustics of familiar spaces. The noise didn't come from outside. Days blurred together after that. I found myself standing in doorways, uncertain whether I'd been entering or leaving. The sensation of forgetting something important clung to me like static electricity, raising the fine hairs on my arms in rooms that should have been warm. I would reach for objects and find my hands stopping just short, as if my body remembered something my mind had discarded. The blank paper haunted my peripheral vision. Not actually there, but the memory of its impossible weight lingered in my palms. I could feel its texture when I closed my eyes, smooth but somehow textured, like skin that had never been touched by sunlight. I don't remember ever coming back. The humming grew stronger on certain nights, usually when the air pressure dropped before storms. I would lie in bed, feeling the vibration travel through the mattress springs up through my spine, settling in the space behind my eyes. During these episodes, time moved strangely. Minutes stretched into hours, or hours compressed into heartbeats. I would blink and find myself in different rooms, no memory of walking there. The envelope returned the following Tuesday, but it felt wrong in my hands. The paper was the same cream color, the handwriting identical, but my fingers recognized a difference my eyes couldn't process. This time, the message inside was a single word written in pencil, so light it was barely visible. Zone. I held the paper to the light again, and for a moment I saw something else. Not text, but shapes. Geometric patterns that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. The metallic taste returned, stronger now, accompanied by a tingling sensation that started in my fingertips and spread up my arms like slow lightning. The lights behind the trees were closer now. I began to notice gaps in my days, moments where I would be doing one thing and suddenly find myself somewhere else entirely, with no memory of the transition. I would be washing dishes and then standing in the backyard, bare feet cold against dew-covered grass, staring at spaces between branches where shadows fell in impossible directions. The humming followed me during these episodes, not just a sound anymore, but a presence I could feel pressing against the inside of my skull. My reflection in mirrors looked slightly delayed, as if the glass was showing me a moment from the past or future instead of the present. There were marks on my skin some mornings, not bruises or scratches, but impressions, as if I'd been pressed against something with a very specific texture. They would fade by afternoon, but I could still feel them tingling beneath the surface, phantom sensations that made me scratch at nothing. I stopped looking at clocks. The numbers never seemed right anyway, and time had become elastic, stretching and contracting according to rules I couldn't grasp. Days might have been weeks, weeks might have been hours. The only constant was the Tuesday envelope, arriving with mechanical precision even as everything else drifted into uncertainty. The noise didn't come from outside, but it wasn't coming from inside either. It existed in the space between, in the thin membrane that separated what I knew from what I was forgetting. When I pressed my palms against my ears, the humming grew louder, as if it originated from within my own bones. I found myself drawing patterns without realizing it. Geometric shapes that matched what I'd glimpsed in the paper, sketched in the margins of books, traced in condensation on windows, carved into the soft wood of pencils with my fingernails. My hands moved with muscle memory I didn't recognize, creating designs that felt familiar despite being completely alien. The blank paper from that first strange Tuesday reappeared in my dreams, always just out of reach, floating in spaces that weren't quite rooms, weren't quite outdoors. In these dreams I could read it clearly, but the words dissolved the moment I tried to focus on them. The weight of it remained constant, pulling at my dream hands with gravitational force that defied the logic of sleep. I don't remember ever coming back, but I must have gone somewhere. The episodes of lost time grew longer. I would sit down to eat breakfast and find myself holding an empty plate as evening light slanted through the windows. My body felt different during these gaps, as if I had been walking for miles or standing perfectly still for hours. My muscles ached with exertion I couldn't remember, and my skin carried the lingering sensation of being touched by something that wasn't quite air. The humming had rhythm now, not music exactly, but patterns within patterns, mathematical sequences that my brain tried to follow but couldn't quite grasp. It was strongest near windows, especially those facing the trees where I'd glimpsed the lights. The glass would vibrate slightly when the sound peaked, creating visual distortions that made the outside world look liquid and unstable. There were other envelopes now, arriving on different days, but always with the same impossible weight, the same handwriting that looked familiar despite being completely alien. The messages varied in length but never in clarity. Single words sometimes, short phrases that meant nothing and everything. Remember, the lights behind the trees weren't lights at all. Soon became, now became, always. I stopped trying to understand and started trying to forget, but forgetting required remembering what needed to be forgotten, and the circular logic trapped me in loops of almost recognition. The metallic taste was permanent now, coating my tongue with the flavor of electricity and ozone, as if I'd been breathing ionized air for months. My reflection began to lag more noticeably. Sometimes it would continue moving after I'd stopped, or remain still while I gestured. The delay was subtle, just a fraction of a second, but enough to make me question whether the person in the mirror was really me or just someone who looked exactly like me. The patterns I'd been drawing appeared in other places. Frost on windows formed the same geometric shapes. Shadows fell in configurations that matched my unconscious sketches. Even the cracks in the sidewalk seemed to follow the mathematical sequences that hummed through my bones during the longest episodes of lost time. The noise didn't come from outside, and it didn't come from inside. It came from the space where I wasn't, the hours I couldn't remember, the moments between blinking when reality readjusted itself around gaps in my experience. I was becoming transparent to my own life, a ghost haunting my own routine. The Tuesday envelope arrived as always, slipped quietly under the door while I wasn't looking. But this time I was ready. I had positioned myself to watch, to finally see who delivered these impossible messages. I waited by the window, eyes fixed on the door, determined not to blink, not to lose another moment to the strange amnesia that had been consuming my days. I watched the envelope appear. Not delivered, not slipped under the door by unseen hands. It simply materialized, fading into existence like a photograph developing in slow motion. The paper looked exactly the same as always, cream-colored and pristine, but now I could see it for what it truly was. Not paper at all, but something that wore the appearance of paper, something that felt heavy because it carried the weight of spaces between thoughts, between moments, between the person I was and the person I was becoming. The humming reached a crescendo as I approached the envelope, and for the first time in weeks I remembered everything clearly. The lights behind the trees, the sensation of being lifted, not physically but temporally, removed from the stream of normal time and examined like a specimen under cosmic scrutiny. The touch that wasn't quite touch, the presence that wasn't quite presence, the communication that bypassed language entirely and spoke directly to the spaces between neurons. I don't remember ever coming back because I never left. I was still there in that suspended moment, experiencing the examination over and over while my body went through the motions of ordinary life. The envelopes were reports, progress notes, observations recorded by something that perceived time differently than I did. The blank paper from the first envelope materialized in my hand as I reached for the new one. Both existed simultaneously now, occupying the same space without conflict, and I understood that they had always been the same document, the same message, viewed from different temporal angles. The weight of it was the weight of revelation, the gravitational pull of understanding that my mind had been protecting me from. The humming wasn't external or internal. It was the sound of my consciousness trying to process experiences that existed outside the normal spectrum of human perception. The lights behind the trees were still there, had always been there, would always be there, waiting patiently for me to remember that I had never stopped being observed, never stopped being part of something larger than the small loop of days and nights I thought constituted my existence. I opened the envelope. It used to arrive every Tuesday, slipped quietly under the door, a plain envelope addressed in neat handwriting. At first I thought nothing of it, just another routine delivery in the monotony of weeks. But now I understand that Tuesdays were never about delivery. They were about return, about the cyclical nature of observation, about the way certain experiences echo backward and forward through time until they become indistinguishable from routine. The humming continues, will always continue, a constant reminder that some encounters leave permanent frequencies in the spaces between thoughts. And every Tuesday I wait by the door, knowing the envelope will arrive, knowing I will open it, knowing I will remember and forget and remember again, caught in the gentle gravitational pull of something that found me worth studying. The paper feels heavy in my hands because it carries the weight of infinite repetition, the mass of moments that exist outside linear time. I read the message, though reading isn't quite the right word for the way understanding flows directly into consciousness without passing through the usual channels of perception. Soon it says, and always and now and never, all simultaneously, all true. The lights behind the trees pulse once, twice, in rhythm with my heartbeat, and I know that tomorrow I will wake with gaps in my memory, with the taste of metal on my tongue, with the sensation of having traveled vast distances while never leaving my bed. But Tuesday will come again, as it always does, and the envelope will arrive, and I will remember just enough to keep the cycle turning, just enough to remain interesting to whatever patient intelligence has made me part of its long, slow study of human consciousness and the beautiful, terrible flexibility of mortal perception. The humming grows softer now, retreating to the frequency of dreams, where it will wait until I need to remember again.